this morning as I was having my business meeting with God. And this is something I do separately from my more traditional QTs. More about QTs in another video because I do want to talk about my lifelong struggle with doing QTs regularly. Like, it's been a struggle, and the Lord has miraculously, I mean, maybe it's because for the first time in forever, I'm no longer in school, but miraculously has given me the motivation even, and the desire and the time and the energy, like all these things that I felt like I didn't have, to be in his word and immersed in his word and communing with him and praying with him for sometimes hours in a day. So that's for another video, because that's a huge struggle of mine and has been, but recently he's really helped me with that, and hopefully I can share with others who are struggling how he's helped me and grown me through that process. Anyways, I was having my business meeting with God, and this is a concept that was inspired by this Christian female entrepreneur. I've just started doing this recently, and it's just been so mind-blowing, because I think often in this age we forget that God speaks to us and that he is a living God who is literally, like, in him and through him, everything on earth around us is happening. Like, he holds literally everything together, and we forget how intimately involved he is in every part of every second of your day. And so I highly recommend doing a business meeting with God, especially if you have your own business. Anyways, in my business meetings, I have this one part of the schedule or the agenda in my Notion template where I go through a passage after about several minutes in prayer. I'll go through a passage that's in this bank. I have this bank of verses that are a collection of verses with anything related to like business, calling, stewardship, even money. And I add some that are kind of related to what I think are life purpose and calling related, gifting related. So what I do is I just choose a random one from that list to go over during my business meeting with God. And I just chose this one. I actually didn't know what the content of it was, because I'm actually admittedly really bad with that. Acts 16:14 was the verse, and it's about Lydia. And I knew very little about Lydia, to be honest, except for the fact that she got converted. And so if I'm honest, when I realized what the verse was, so it was literally Acts 16:14, and I'll read it to you. It says, "A God-fearing woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira, was listening. The Lord opened her heart to respond to what Paul was saying." Period. And that was it. And when I looked at that verse, I was like, part of me was like, okay, I know the word is living and active, and like, oh, that's so cool. Someone was converted. Cool story. But kind of confused, like, okay, maybe this is not really related to business, and it's a Christian businesswoman who got saved, essentially. Or it's a businesswoman who got saved and became a Christian. But of course, it wasn't just that. And the more I dug into this passage and saw the context, the more mind blown I was by the sovereignty of God and all the things that it took, how intentionally he had orchestrated all these things to bring about the conversion of this woman for the sake of the kingdom. And so starting off a little bit earlier in the passage, just to provide some context. So Paul is with his crew, and they're going through different parts of regions, evangelizing. They were apparently trying to like make their way towards Asia. So what I found really interesting here is the explicit mention that they had in verse 6 and 7. Says the crew had been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak the word in Asia. And again, it says, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them when they try to go like to these regions. And it's just so interesting that it's mentioned there explicitly, because scripture doesn't always mention explicitly every time the Spirit is moving, because the Spirit is constantly moving. Like, God is constantly working, but it's not always explicitly mentioning that, especially in books like the Book of Esther. But it's just so funny that the Spirit was blocking them from going to Asia, and obviously wanting to spread the word, spread the good news in Asia. That's like a really good thing. Like, why not go to Asia? And why was God blocking that when that's a good thing? But his purposes are much higher than ours, and he has a perfect timeline, and he's writing the story exactly how he wants it and in the wonderfully dramatic way. And I say that in the best way, dramatic way that he does. And so that was just an interesting mental note. So he's blocking them from going to Asia. So remember that. And then not only is he blocking them from going to Asia, Paul has this vision. And in this vision, there's a Macedonian man who is pleading with him to basically say, like, cross over to Macedonia and help us. And when he had that vision at night, like this dream, so it says they immediately made efforts to go to Macedonia. So they immediately obeyed when they concluded that God was calling them to preach to that area. And then go on to verse 11, they go to Macedonia essentially, and they end up at Philippi, which is a Roman colony, which they stay at for several days. And so there is where on the Sabbath day, on the Lord's Day, they were expecting to find like a Jewish synagogue or something by the river, because rivers, they were often where like these synagogues or places of worship were at, because Jewish law, they needed living water, like flowing water for ritual purposes, ritual washing. And so they go to this area where they thought that they were going to find a place of prayer. And instead, they find this random group of women who are gathered there. People are saying like this was like a prayer meeting happening of women. And so Paul and crew, they sit down with them and speak to the women there. And they, I guess, give like a little sermon or something. Because then we hear that is where this verse 14 comes into play. And then it says, a God-fearing woman named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth from the city Thyatira, was listening. The Lord opened her heart to respond to what Paul was saying. After she and her household were baptized, she urged us, if you consider me a believer in the Lord, come and stay at my house. And she persuaded us. And that's the end of that section. End scene. Okay, now let's break this down, because this is where it gets so crazy. So Lydia, it says she's a God-fearing woman, which is already like kind of strange because she's about to get converted and baptized. And yet it says she's a God-fearing woman. So what that tells me is like, something was already working in her. God was already working in this woman up until this point. Okay, that's one note. Secondly, she is a dealer in purple cloth, it says, from the city of Thyatira. Purple dye was really famous at that time. It's like very rich, wealthy people had it. Her area that she's from, Thyatira, was an area that was known for their expensive purple dyes. And so she was likely a wealthy businesswoman. And now note Thyatira, when I looked up more about where that is, it's not in Philippi. But remember, this is taking place in Philippi, okay? Philippi is in Macedonia, right? Thyatira is actually a city that is in Asia Minor, modern Turkey. And remember that Asia was the place where Paul and team were prohibited by the Spirit from going. And so I was reading some commentary on this, and I was reading this Charles Spurgeon sermon about Lydia's conversion, and it's just so good. You have to read that sermon if you get to it, if you get a chance. But he talks about how much had to happen for the Lord to orchestrate all these events for the conversion of this woman and all these things that had to fall in place. And meanwhile, Paul and crew, they're just like trying to follow along with where the Spirit's leading them. Their plans may seem to have been ruined in certain ways, but everything was going exactly as planned. And if you think about it, Lydia was in Philippi, likely people suspect because she was a businesswoman. So she was traveling from region to region, and she was doing business in Philippi, likely. But had she been in Thyatira, she may have never heard the word, because that was in Asia, and that's where Paul and crew were being prohibited from going. So she just happened to be in Philippi the time that Paul and crew happened to be there. And she just happens to be with a group of women by this river that Paul and crew happened to go to at the same exact time on the Lord's Day, because they thought that there was going to be like a synagogue there or something. And then he just happens to preach this message, and she, listening, believes. Because the Lord opened her heart, because the Lord had orchestrated all these things for her to believe, for her to be converted, for her to be one of his. And then it doesn't even end there, because she is the first recorded conversion in Europe. And then immediately, what does she do? Her and her household are baptized. And then immediately she urges Paul and the crew, like, come stay at my house. Immediately, you could see her heart as a disciple. The hospitality comes through. And she's like this wealthy person. So she probably has so much that she can offer in terms of hospitality. Okay. And then Paul and Silas goes on and they go to prison and like all this stuff happens. Earthquake, it's kind of crazy. This slave girl who's like crazy. And then we go to verse 40. Okay, this is the same chapter, chapter 16, verse 40. The last verse. So after this whole thing happens, it's another crazy story. Paul and Silas, they are out of prison. And after leaving the jail, they came to Lydia's house where they saw and encouraged the brothers and sisters and departed. And so what the commentaries say here is there are brothers and sisters at Lydia's house. And so her house has become a place of hospitality, a place of gathering, a meeting place for believers. It's called like the first recorded house church in Europe. That is mind-blowing. And it's done through this random businesswoman who God had been working in, who was probably just like doing her thing, making money, like the normal stuff that business people do. And little did she know, and little did Paul and crew know, that he had these very specific plans, that he detoured everyone along the way to bring the gospel to Europe. And so that was just so, like, even when I think about it right now, it's like I tear up because I tear up because this is what God is doing all the time in our lives. We are, in many ways, like each of these little characters here, that he is in unsuspecting ways, whether he's creating detours in our plans, blocking us from going to places or from doing things that we actually think are good. They're just not a part of his plan, or just not at the timing that he wants. And it's for specific reasons. And so we are, on one hand, Lydia, in that he, you know, there's that phrase, like the universe converged, or what is it? Conspired. Oh, that's the phrase. The universe conspired to make something happen. Like God like conspired all these things to happen for his elect to be saved, for us to be saved, which is crazy. Okay, so not only did he conspire everything in the universe to save us, but we're also like Paul in the sense that we're going about doing our normal stuff, getting detours, getting confused by like, why are we even here? Or why aren't you letting us go here, God? And in all of that, he's like working out his grand plan. And we don't have to know what that all looks like. We just have to follow. We just have to be like Paul and just follow where the Spirit leads and be okay when things get detoured, when things get derailed from our plans, because he is working something there. And I think in that also, it did make me think, like, as someone who studied business and is just in a stage where I'm trying to figure out how the Lord wants to use all these things that he's given me. In many ways, I feel like Lydia, where he's blessed me with various things, various education sectors, life experiences, and like when the time came when he revealed himself to me. And given I've been a Christian for a long time, but there's just been periods of what I would call, like, it almost feels like a rebirth because of how much he's shown me on such a different level that I almost am like, was I even a Christian before this point? Because it's just so indescribable and overwhelming and like transformed my paradigm. Everything just looks different. And so I feel also weirdly like Lydia at a point where he has opened my heart, has already given me these things, and he's like, all right, now go. And the fact that she like is a kind of combination of all these sectors of like commerce and hospitality and faith, it feels very aligned with me because those are all things that are really important to me too. So how that translates into my business meeting with God, I have all these reflections on that. But I think you can kind of guess how that's affected the way that I'm thinking through even my business. And what that means. Essentially, wanting to steward things for Him because He's put us in such specific places at specific times for His purpose. And now I just want to read one of my favorite verses in Acts 17, which I'm just realizing this is right before Acts 17, which is one of my favorite verses, which blows my mind because, you can't, okay, I'll show you because I want to prove it. It's literally my Wi-Fi. Literally my Wi-Fi. What do you call it? Your Wi-Fi name? Literally my Wi-Fi name is Acts 17:26. And so Acts 17:26. Okay, let's go there right now. You know what? I'm going to read the whole section starting from verse 24. Okay? So, the God who made the world and everything in it, He is Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by hands, neither is He served by human hands as though He needed anything, since He Himself gives everyone life and breath and all things. From one man He has made every nationality to live over the whole earth, and has determined their appointed times and the boundaries of where they live. He did this so that they might seek God, and perhaps they might reach out and find Him, though He is not far from each one of us. For in Him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are also His offspring. Okay, let me re-emphasize that. From one man from the beginning, He has made every nationality to live over the whole earth. This is talking about every single one of us. Over the whole earth, and has determined their appointed times, the time frame you're in right now, and the boundaries of where they live. Your exact residence right now and wherever He takes you, that has all been determined. Okay? It's all been determined from the beginning of time. And He did this so that we might seek God, who is not far from us. For in Him we live and move and have our being. Oh, this is right after Acts 16 and the conversion of Lydia, the chapter after. I'm mind blown. Anyways, so with that, I just wanted to say, I don't really have a way to wrap this up other than God is so sovereign. And wherever He's leading you, wherever He's leading me, we can trust in that because He is the best planner. As a J, I respect and I am thankful for the good planners of this world because it alleviates the stress from me. But we have the ultimate planner who's not even just a planner, but makes His story so grand and amazing, who has written our stories, and we can trust in that. And so that's what I'm going to try to do in this season as He brings me on what I think is a new chapter in my life.
Little did she know that this would indeed be a new chapter in her life. A very crazy new chapter.
And so that concludes part of my reflections during my business meeting with God. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.